So I have a Halloween trick-or-treating story for you about an utterly terrifying child. It doesn't really matter if you hear it outside the Halloween season, though, because it actually takes place in February. That alone was what made it so unsettling at first. The knock on the door, followed by a small child standing there in a ghost costume, saying, "Trick or treat," and holding out his battered pumpkin pail. A lone kid trick-or-treating in a classic ghost costume is already a little creepy on Halloween, but at least that's when it's expected. This was a Friday night in early February, exactly 9 p.m. In that moment, I was honestly a bit speechless. I couldn't see what the kid looked like under the thin sheet of his ghost costume, but he had the height and build of a small 6-year-old. He sounded like a boy, and I awkwardly repeated, "Trick or treat," back to him, and he nodded eagerly and said, "Yeah." He shook his little bucket in a way that was strangely endearing. When he did, I could see there was already some candy inside, probably from my nearest neighbors. I lived on a rural, suburban property when this happened, where the houses weren't very close together, but spaced far enough apart that a kid could realistically walk around the small neighborhood trick-or-treating. That's how the kids did it on Halloween, at least. I had never dealt with that in February before, and never with a kid this young who wasn't accompanied by his parents. I told him to wait on the porch, closed the screen door, and went back inside. I grabbed a bag of Reese's Pieces and poured some into his bucket. The little kid thanked me very politely and then said, "See you tomorrow, mister." I remember thinking to myself, "Oh, you would you?" And I spent the next day occasionally laughing at what a clever little scam this kid had put together. It was a friendly neighborhood, and who was going to say no to an adorable little chic ghost trick-or-treating in February? It was so obvious and so silly that it almost surprised me more kids didn't try it. By telling me, "See you tomorrow," he'd given me fair warning to make sure I had fresh candy ready. I even made a point to grab extra while I was at the store. It did briefly occur to me that, as a guy in his mid-30s living alone, giving candy to strange, lone kids could turn into a problem. I figured that as long as the kids stayed on the porch, in full view of the neighbors, it would be fine. Everyone in the area knew each other, and it seemed harmless to give a little candy to support his small scam. Besides, my girlfriend stayed over some nights, and she was just away for a while. I didn't expect the scam to last until she got back. I honestly thought there couldn't be any harm in playing along. I was very wrong, in ways I never could have predicted. That night, at exactly 9 p.m., the doorbell rang, and the little kid in the sheet ghost costume was standing there. "Trick or treat, mister." Then he lifted the pale bucket and gave it a shake. He already had a decent haul, it seemed, though nowhere near what he would have gotten on Halloween. I laughed, nodded in approval, and dropped some candy into his bucket. He thanked me and walked away with another, "See you tomorrow, mister." This ritual repeated itself for the next week. By the time the following Friday rolled around and the doorbell rang again at 9 p.m. sharp, I was starting to feel a little frustrated. My girlfriend was coming back into town the next day, and I had to pick her up from the airport, which meant getting up around 4 a.m. I had also convinced myself that this kid's candy scam, as sweet and oddly endearing as it was, would last exactly 7 days and end before my girlfriend got back. I hadn't mentioned the strange ghost kid to her during our calls, and now it felt awkward having to explain that a kid had been trick-or-treating at our house almost every night in February. Yes, it had been happening while you were gone, and no, I didn't mention it, for reasons I couldn't really explain. I could have just said that I expected the kid to get bored before I did, but that night I was already looking for reasons to be annoyed. When I opened the door, the kid gave his usual trick or treat and held out his bucket. When he shook it, I saw it was filled with candy this time. I rolled my eyes and commented that the scam was clearly paying off, buddy. The kid made a confused little sound, like he didn't understand. Against my better judgment, that made me snap. I told him it had been cute and funny at first, but that if I was going to keep giving him candy, he could at least respect my intelligence and admit it was a scam. I said, "You don't trick or treat in February," and asked him to confirm that he knew it wasn't actually Halloween. When I asked that, the kid slowly lowered his bucket and then dropped his head, like he was sad. And through the thin ghost costume, I heard him mutter that I wasn't supposed to ask that. A chill ran down my spine as I suddenly realized it felt like I was trapped in some kind of no-sleep story. And damn, if only it had been a simple supernatural curse, maybe I wouldn't still be dealing with the injuries I have today. Instead, the kid looked back up at me through his little ghost costume and began laughing in a way that was clearly tormenting and cruel. Then I heard a creak from the porch on my right. Another, much older kid stepped around the side of the house and said, "You don't ask that, 'cause I said so." Before I could react, this tall, wiry teenager started punching me with some kind of brass knuckle made out of a chain. The blows were agony. I immediately fell to the ground and took a flurry of kicks. The whole time, I could hear that obnoxious ghost child laughing with some kind of glee. I had been so blindsided by the attack that I hadn't even thought to yell or scream. When I finally did, the teen attacking me responded by stomping on my spine, kicking me in the ribs, and leaping off the porch. I vaguely saw the little ghost kid climb onto the teenager's back like some kind of piggyback ride. Then they ran off into the darkness. As quickly as I could, I dragged myself to my feet and called the cops. They got there surprisingly fast for where I lived, and eventually accompanied me to the local hospital so I could get checked out. I had a couple of broken ribs, and my spine has never been quite right since that attack. I think the cops said it was the third similar report of kids doing this in the county. When we checked with my immediate neighbors, none of them had actually been visited by the ghost kid or his violent older brother. It seemed like the whole thing had been targeted at my place. At first, I was completely baffled because the kids didn't steal anything. The older one just beat me violently, and then they both left. The only thing they really got out of it was a little bit of free candy. I kept harassing the cops, saying maybe I was in danger, and maybe the kids would come back. Eventually, a detective did come to visit me and told me he wasn't strictly supposed to let me know this, but he would if it helped put my mind at ease. Basically, the working theory was that it was some kind of gang initiation. The teenager who beat me would accompany the little kid until their target challenged them on the fact that it wasn't Halloween. Then there would be an attack, and the attacker would be initiated into the gang. From what the cops were working with, the attacker in each case had been a different guy, but the ghost kid was the same little kid every time. The detective told me, on the down low, that they suspected the ghost kid was the gang leader's own son, and supposedly just as much of a psycho as his old man. So this class act was using his own little kid to lead gang initiations, and I'd just been an unknowing schlub who was in the wrong place at the wrong time. After that, I never really heard anything more about it, or any other reports of this kind of gang initiation. So maybe they realized it drew too much attention. I guess I have to be thankful that they settled on something a little childish and not actually fatal, instead of the usual murder a guy and you're in kind of thing. On the other hand, it still sucks to think about kids being initiated into these gangs in the first place, even older teenagers. But when I think about that ghost kid laughing as I got pounded on and beaten, there's no doubt in my mind that this kid's mind was already long gone into the darkness. And I pity anyone who encounters him as he becomes an adult. So I've got a story for you about a time when I was a young kid myself, and we encountered a strange child. I think this is genuinely the scariest thing that's ever actually happened to me. And if I get sick, like with a fever or anything. This is always the thing I have nightmares about, if I'm going to have them. So I figured I'd try to exercise them by writing to you about it. This was back in the 90s, which was the best time to be a kid, because it just was. This happened around 97, and life was simpler and more relaxed back then. Things really changed everywhere after the beginning of the 2000s. I think we all know why. And it's not just nostalgia talking for me. Things changed before that. That summer of 97, though. And when I think back on it, I picture it like a movie. Me and my 4 buddies, 3 other guys and 1 girl. We didn't have some cool nickname like the Losers Club or the Goonies. And I don't even remember if the kids were actually called the Goonies in that movie. But anyway, we didn't have a cool team name. We were just kind of the gang. It was me, James, Barry, Patrick, and Kendall. That summer, we spent most of our time exploring our rural neighborhood, playing various made-up games in fields and forests, and just having a good time. We built a fort, we made a dam, we rode our bikes, and we had picnics. We were all between 8 and 10 years old and wanted the summer to last forever. Or at least until our quarters ran out at the arcade, it got cold, or one of us almost died. Unfortunately, it was the last one that brought an end to our summer of fun. We met the strange kid on a Monday. We knew him for 5 days. He said his name was Caleb. At the time, we were finishing up our fort in the forest, so we let Caleb tag along because he asked. He seemed younger than us, and he said he had just moved into the area. He had a pretty cool new bike, which at the time I did not find suspicious. Now, when I look back on it, I think Caleb probably stole that bike. You see, Caleb was a super unkempt and scruffy kid. His clothes were almost rags, and I do not mean like some old Victorian kid. Just typical, normal 90s kid clothes, but they were badly torn, dirty, and clearly hand-me-downs. They made Caleb look like he came from a family my sister would have called dirt poor. Caleb came to hang out with us every day that week and disappeared at dinner time like clockwork. When Barry and I mentioned Caleb in front of my mom, she said she thought he must be part of the farming family who had moved into the farm down the way. He was not, as it turned out, but it was a good guess. He was just some other random neighborhood kid who had recently started hanging around. On Friday, Caleb begged and pleaded with us to come with him and see something cool he had found. We had plans to carve our initials into the trees that day, but it could wait. So we let Caleb lead us around the outskirts of some fields we were not really supposed to cut through. Eventually, after crossing a small patch of trees we had never been in and carefully balancing our way over a narrow stream, we reached the destination Caleb had in mind. It was a massive sinkhole. I had heard about the sinkhole in the area. We had all been vaguely warned to stay away from it, but none of us actually knew where it was. Now, Caleb had led us right to it. More than that, he started waxing poetic about how he lived down in the hole. "No, you don't," Kendall said to him. Caleb insisted that yes, he did. He lived down in the sinkhole. According to him, you jumped into the sinkhole and it teleported you to his home, a magical place called Salt City, where the arcade machines were on free play and everything was super awesome. Then he said he would show us, as long as one of us jumped down the sinkhole. Of course, we all knew this was insane. None of us wanted to go near the sinkhole, let alone jump into it. We were also way too old to believe in magical teleporters to places called Salt City. I guess Caleb had heard the name Salt Lake City before and decided Salt City sounded like a more appealing alternative. But when you really think about it, it was hardly the magical kingdom of Terabithia. Salt City. Come on. Caleb kept hooting and hollering about Salt City this and Salt City that, insisting that we jump down into that sinkhole and go there with him. At first, it didn't even occur to us to question why Caleb wanted us to throw ourselves down a hole that would almost certainly kill us. Instead, we played along, questioning him about this so-called Salt City as we circled the edges of the sinkhole. We stayed back, though, vaguely aware of the danger that Caleb might try to push one of us in. Why wouldn't he jump in himself, we asked. He said he was saving the teleports for us. How did he leave each day to come play with us? Magic and other nonsense. It was all completely absurd. Eventually, Kendall leaned in and whispered that maybe it was dangerous that Caleb wanted us to do this, and that we should probably tell an adult. I agreed and tried to get the other three to leave with us. James, however, had started arguing with Caleb and was daring him to jump if he was so determined. I whispered to James that if Caleb actually did it, we would be in serious trouble. That was when I think James finally understood how serious the situation was. Caleb was trying to convince us to do something extremely dangerous. Any kid who would push something like that wasn't someone we wanted to be friends with. That much was obvious. We decided to leave Caleb there with his hole. Unfortunately, Caleb became furious and aggressive and suddenly grabbed James, trying to drag him back toward the sinkhole. It was like this kid went feral, deciding he was going to throw James down there and deal with whatever came next. I don't know. What I do know is that I realized James was in immediate danger. Even though Caleb was younger than us, he was stronger than he looked, and he was actually pulling James toward the edge. None of us wanted to rush in too close, afraid the ground might give way. I did the only thing I could think of. I grabbed the nearest object, a small log, and threw it at Caleb when I saw an opening. My aim was true. The log struck him square in the temple, sending him stumbling backward. He staggered so hard that he nearly went straight into the sinkhole. Thankfully, James managed to grab Caleb's arm and pull him forward. Caleb collapsed at the edge of the sinkhole, and we cautiously moved closer to see what had happened. Caleb appeared to be unconscious. His temple was bloody where the log had struck him. A small amount of blood was also leaking from the corner of his mouth. In that moment, we made a decision. This kid had been trying to convince us to do something incredibly cruel, and had then tried to potentially murder James. We had no idea who he was or who his family might be. On the other hand, we knew we would be in a mountain of trouble if we told anyone that we had been to that sinkhole. It was our word against Caleb's about what had happened. We decided to leave him unconscious at the sinkhole and run away. At the time, it felt like there were only two paths, and we chose the one that kept the truth buried. I spent 5 years with that secret weighing on us, never knowing if we had killed Caleb or if we could have saved him. Those were 5 years of nightmares, guilt, and quiet terror each time Caleb failed to show up the next day, or the next, or the next. By then, we were all too scared to say anything. It became our secret, something we avoided mentioning to each other unless we absolutely had to. By the time high school rolled around, we were certain we had killed a kid in the summer of 1997. It felt like a secret we would carry with us to the grave. After 2 years of high school, when most of us were in our junior year, the freshman class started, and Caleb was among them. We found out when a kid with a mullet and a scorpion t-shirt came up to us at lunch and said, "Hey, aren't you the kids I got into a fight with one summer and nearly threw into a sinkhole?" He apologized after that. Caleb believed he'd suffered heat stroke or something similar that day because he had no idea why he'd tried to persuade us to jump into the sinkhole. He said he genuinely enjoyed hanging out with us that week, and that day he'd felt a strong, overwhelming compulsion to lead us to the hole and tell that nonsensical story. We had spent the previous 5 years believing we'd killed him and being too afraid of getting in trouble to ever find out who he was. He had spent those same 5 years feeling so guilty that he never tried to find out who we were. In the end, we laughed about it and even hung out with Caleb a few times after that. It didn't happen often, since he had his own group of friends and we were different ages. The relief was strange and unsettling at the same time. When I still have fever dream nightmares, this is what I see: how much worse things could have been for all of us if even one event had unfolded differently. How stupid it was of us to just leave Caleb there. But more than that, I think what haunts me most is the story Caleb told us. How that day, maybe because of heat stroke, he felt this strong, pressing compulsion to tell us all to jump into that hole. It makes me wonder whether, if we had walked closer to that edge, we would have felt the pull of the abyss too. So I wanted to write to you today to finally share a story that happened to me when I was a little kid back in the 1990s. It caused a deep rift in my family at the time, for reasons you will soon see. And it involved my single aunt, who was my dad's sister, and her daughter Serena, my cousin. My parents were not married when they had me, and for a long time they said they did not need some official piece of paper to show their commitment to one another. Well, eventually I guess they did need that official piece of paper for one reason or another. So they decided that if they were going to get married, they would do it properly. I was a little bridesmaid to my own mom, and it felt like a little girl's dream. The whole day felt like some kind of magic fairy tale. The only part of that memory that feels more like a nightmare is remembering my cousin Serena lurking on the edges of the wedding, dressed in black and scowling at me. I remember her whispering that it physically hurt her to be inside the church during the service, and later at the reception telling me she was never going to get married, that people who got married were lame, and that she would never commit to one person except her one true Lord, Satan. Serena was a 15-year-old emo teen. I was a 6-year-old princess wannabe, and I believed every word my older, and therefore obviously smarter, cousin told me. Also, my mom and dad told me I had to become friends with Serena because I was going to be staying with her and Auntie June while they went on their honeymoon. So it was like Serena was going to be my sister for a while. Serena had been there when they said this, and she acted very excited and happy about it. And she did not mention Satan, or how being in church hurt her soul, or any of the insanity that was about to follow. Her dressing in black was a bit of an eccentricity, my dad said, a word I didn't know at the time but kind of liked. He said that Auntie June had been like that when she was a kid too, and now Auntie June was the nicest, sweetest person we knew, wasn't she? I agreed. Auntie June was lovely and nice and sweet, and I remembered Serena being nice and sweet too, and she hadn't worn black or even spoken like that the other times I'd met her. And this was a recent thing. At the wedding, I asked her if it had always burned her soul to go inside a church like she was claiming, and she said yes. But I knew she had been at my baptism when I was a baby, and I'd never heard about her getting burned then. She told me the only reason she didn't catch fire at the wedding was because she had performed sacred rites to protect her soul from God. I didn't really understand any of this at the time, but I knew I'd been taught that God was good and loving, so I was very confused about why Serena would be scared of him. I think even at 6, I knew she was lying to some degree, and maybe just sort of play acting. I definitely didn't take it seriously, or think it was scary, or even think much of it at all, though. I thought she was cool, and I was excited to spend the next nearly 3 weeks with her and Auntie June in their house on Millick Road, where Auntie June and Serena promised me they'd made me an exciting bedroom that would be mine for the whole time I was there. I'd previously been told that I was going to share with Serena, so I was a little disappointed that I'd have my own room instead. But when I mentioned this to Mom and Dad, Mom just said that Auntie June had told them it would be for the best if I had the guest room. The first couple of days with my aunt and cousin were just normal, fun days. I either spent time being fussed over by Auntie June or by Serena when Auntie June had to go out to work. It was summer vacation, but not for Auntie June, obviously, and Auntie June sometimes worked in the evenings, and then Serena would have to babysit me. Sort of. Auntie June said she'd try to switch to as many day shifts as possible, but there would be some nights when she wasn't there. It was on the third day staying there that I had my first overnight alone with Serena, and that was when she dimmed the living room lights and told me to scooch in close and listen real good because she had to tell me something important. I listened, excited to hear what she was going to say, and she told me their house was haunted. Now, I assumed this was some kind of game because Mom and Dad had told me many times that ghosts were not real. So I played along and acted shocked. Serena did not seem to think I was taking it very seriously, though, so she tried to stress how scary and dangerous it was. When I kept giggling and talking about ghosts I had seen in cartoons, she changed her approach, telling me that ghosts worked for demons, and that demons came from hell. So I had to take this seriously, or Satan would claim my soul. I reminded her that she had told me she pledged her soul to Satan at the wedding, and she called me a smartass. Then she became very serious and told me I had to believe her now. She said she had pledged her soul to Satan to save me, because someone, she did not know who, was planning to sacrifice me to the demons. Eventually, this started to upset me a little. I think Serena got the reaction she wanted, because the more upset I became, the more she continued. I do not remember the exact details, but she started describing very dark horror movie things, how the demons would take me down to hell, slowly peel my skin off, eat my soul, and how it would all happen because someone had sold my soul to Satan. Serena said she pledged her own soul to Satan to protect me, and that was why she avoided churches and dressed in black. Then she showed me a pentagram she had drawn on her arm with a Sharpie and told me it was the Dark Lord's mark. It all seemed very silly, but when you are a little kid and an older kid is trying to upset you, it works, even if you do not really believe them or care. I think that is what happened at first. Then Serena said it was very important that we figure out who had sold my soul to Satan, because the only way we could both get our souls back was to break their pact. That night, Serena let me stay up far too late, so I was overtired already. I remember having nightmares and waking up afraid of every sound in the night and every ghost in the house. I had always been a rational, grounded child, but even I started to wonder if there was something to Serena's story. After all, why would she lie about something like that? Over the next few days, I spent a lot of time with Auntie June. Serena was not around much, and when she was, she and Auntie June kept having arguments that escalated into screaming. Whenever this happened, June would send me into the other room to watch TV or ask me to do some chore in the garden. But I heard enough to hear Serena accusing June of being wicked, evil, and controlling. The next time Serena babysat me during one of June's night shifts, she told me that her mother was an evil woman who mistreated her, and that she believed it was June who had sold my soul to Satan. Now, I found this very hard to believe because June was lovely and very kind to me, and she could be pretty scary when she was arguing with Serena. That was true. I told Serena about my skepticism while trying not to offend her, and she looked upset and said that she understood, because Satan's minions are very convincing. It still confused me that Serena had claimed to be Satan's minion at the wedding, but I guess I was too young to start second-guessing theories about who was behind what demonic pact, especially when I did not really believe in any of it beyond the idea that people were angry with each other and wanted me to be afraid of something. Just over a week passed before Serena babysat me again, and this time she told me that she had definitive proof that Auntie June was the one who had sold my soul to Satan. In the last few days, I had spent a lot of time with June outside the house, and she had even taken me to the store the day before and bought me a new toy. Because of that, I was pretty convinced she had not sold my soul to Satan. I also had not seen any evidence of the ghosts or demons that supposedly infested the house, according to Serena. Again, she explained that this was because she had signed her own pact with Satan to protect us. I had overheard June and Serena arguing about me, though. Serena accused her of giving me too much attention and trying to get her claws into me, which did sound frightening. Admittedly, it was very hard to know who to believe when, in my eyes, they were both adults. Obviously now I know that I should have told June what was going on right away. But I was a kid. That night, Serena took us into Auntie June's bedroom, which was somewhere we were not supposed to go. It was always locked, but Serena said she knew how to pick the lock using magic. When she told me to look away so my soul would not be corrupted, I saw her slip a key out of her pocket. Inside, she showed me the evidence. June had horror novels on her bookshelf, and on a board in her room, there was an old Polaroid photo of Auntie June, dressed as a witch, standing next to a devil who looked suspiciously like my dad in a Halloween costume. Serena insisted this was real photographic proof of her mother at an old coven meeting where she had committed herself to Satan, though I was less impressed by the horror novels. Some of the covers were genuinely very scary to me, and I did not understand how someone like Auntie June would want or allow things like that in the house. I am not really sure why this became the deciding piece of evidence that began to sway me, but it did. I had been so rational and sensible up until then. But seeing all that terrifying imagery sitting on June's bookshelf, Serena somehow managed to convince me that it did, in fact, prove there was an evil side to Auntie June. I still did not believe any of the Satan nonsense, or the pacts, or selling my soul, or anything like that. I think Serena knew that, because she shifted the angle of her story a little, and now it was more about stopping Auntie June from doing bad things to us in general, that she was secretly a wicked and abusive woman, and that we had to help purify her soul. We left the bedroom, and Serena locked it again behind her, making me look away to save my soul while she did the magic. Then she took me into my bedroom. We never went into Serena's bedroom either. She said it was because that was where the ghosts congregated, and it would scare me to see all the things she had to surround herself with because of her selfless pact with Satan. Serena told me to sit on the bed and wait while she went to her room to get something. While she was gone, I heard bangs and crashes in the hallway that I think were meant to sound like ghosts, but were clearly just Serena. Eventually, she came back with a small baggie holding 3 berries. She held them up, looked at me very seriously, and told me they were holy berries blessed by God, and that we needed to make sure Auntie June ingested them. Because I had been doing the cooking with her lately, I was supposed to slip them into her food somehow. Serena made me promise that I would. She made me swear on my life, and on the lives of my mother and father. I crossed my toes and swore. Like I said, I was not a stupid kid. I knew that whatever Serena was asking me to do was not a good idea. I also knew that berries could be dangerous. What I could not wrap my head around was why Serena would want me, her cousin who she was supposed to love, to hurt her mother, who she was also supposed to love. It did not really register to me that they could be truly dangerous, and that is why I did not take it as seriously as I should have. I was also about 6, remember. I wish I could say, in Serena's defense, that I am not sure she meant for me to go through with it, that she hesitated, or told me to do it only if I could. But I cannot. She was very firm that I had to do it. Like I said, she made me swear. She told me very clearly to put them into the fruit salad that Auntie June had made, the one only she ever ate, because it always had blueberries in it. She also told me that if anything happened, she would not explain what, only that I would know. Then she said I had to admit it was me who gave Auntie June the berries, because otherwise it would undo the breaking of the pact. Serena had carefully set me up to get into trouble and then coached me on how to take the blame. The problem was that I had no idea how serious any of this really was. What I did instead was wait until late that night, after everyone had gone to bed. I went to the bathroom and took the little bag with me. My plan was simple: flush them away and then tell Serena I had done what she asked, with no one being any wiser. I even felt clever for thinking ahead, knowing that if I dropped the berries straight into the toilet, they might not flush. So I crushed them in my hand, wiped the pulp away, and flushed that instead. I even tasted a tiny bit of the juice on my tongue, just in case they really were blueberries after all. And they were not. Then I scrubbed my hands until every trace of purple was gone and went to bed. The next thing I remember clearly is waking up in a hospital with terrible stomach pain and barely being able to breathe. After that, I drifted in and out of consciousness, with doctors and nurses rushing around in panic. At one point, I saw Auntie June pacing back and forth, asking me if I had eaten something I should not have. I was just clear-headed enough to tell her about Serena and the berries, even though it felt awful to betray my cousin. I told her I had not eaten them, only crushed them and tasted a little, so I did not think that was why I was so sick. After that, my memories blur again. But I remember Auntie June and Serena screaming at each other in the hospital, and then another voice shouting at both of them. I remember being forced to drink a thick, disgusting black liquid, and everyone looking slightly relieved, even though I felt no better at all. I spent several days frightened, miserable, and weak in that hospital, until my parents came back early from their honeymoon, and I had never been so relieved to see anyone. So yes, my cousin Serena tried to get me to poison my aunt with deadly nightshade, and because I was too sensible to let her convince me to do it, but too naive to believe it could truly be dangerous, I ended up poisoning myself instead, even if only a little. It could have been a lot worse. I could have ended my own life, or worse, I could have ended up killing my aunt. I am not sure I would have ever been able to forgive myself for that. No matter how much people told me it would not have been my fault, I do not think I could have accepted that as true. One thing was certain, though. Serena had tried to convince me to poison her mother, and her actions led to me being mildly poisoned instead. Because of that, everyone wanted to know why and what had happened. At the time, I was young and did not really follow or understand what was going on. I recovered in the hospital and was told that I would not be seeing Serena or Auntie June again. That later changed, but that was what my dad told me then. I was pretty angry at the time. I think part of me had also become scared of Auntie June after everything Serena had told me and after reading the horror novels on her bookshelf. I remember feeling relieved that I would not have to deal with any of it again and that I could focus on getting better. Here is how everything eventually played out. It turned out that Auntie June had been struggling badly with Serena for about a year. Almost overnight, Serena had gone from a well-behaved and kind girl into something unrecognizable. June was barely coping, but she did not want to admit it to anyone because she feared being judged. She knew Serena genuinely cared about her little cousin, so she believed that me staying there during my parents' honeymoon might help repair their relationship. Instead, it made everything worse. My dad was extremely angry at his sister for hiding how serious Serena's behavior had become. Shortly before my stay, Serena had been physically violent toward June, and all my dad could think about was the fact that I had been put in danger. It did not take long for him to realize he had been too harsh on Auntie June. Serena was not just a troubled teenager. She was eventually diagnosed with several serious mental illnesses and went through long periods of inpatient psychiatric treatment. Early on, my dad was determined to push for an attempted murder charge against Serena, especially because she seemed completely unrepentant at the time. Once it became clear how severely ill and suffering she was, that decision was dropped. Over time, the rifts healed. Life was very hard for Serena, but she eventually overcame her demons. She can even joke about it now and lives a somewhat normal, if unconventional, life. We are very close friends, and she knows I am sharing this story. We both have a strange attitude about it, where we would get a kick out of it if it ever ended up being told as a story somewhere else. So hopefully that shows that despite being a completely terrifying and horrific experience for everyone involved, it did at least end on a happy note. A lot of people have stories about that one kid from their school days who was just the absolute worst. My story goes further than that. The kid in question was not actually scary. He wanted to be scary. He wanted to be intimidating, and he wanted the rest of us to be afraid of him. He was new to the school, a short little guy dropped into a new place in the middle of year 7. I can understand why he decided to put on a front, but he was still an oddball. He came to our school with a sour attitude and made it clear he had no interest in fitting in. He did not want friends. Instead, he wanted fear. So he chose someone to copy, someone he thought we would see as dangerous and impressive. Unfortunately, that person was Fred Redcap. To set the scene, I was just an average year 7 girl doing average things, watching all of this unfold. Redcap was a short, puny kid, short even by our 11 and 12-year-old standards. He had a baby face and blonde hair. He would stomp around the school doing the Nookie walk from the Limp Bizkit video, openly pretending to be Fred Redcap, scowling at people and muttering the F word if anyone got too close. Teachers said he had behavioral issues, but as you might expect, to a bunch of kids, we found Redcap hilarious. He also insisted that everyone call him Redcap. Limp Bizkit is hard to explain to anyone who was not a kid during that era. They were a strange band, widely considered terrible. Their early albums got mixed to bad reviews, and one magazine even voted them the worst band of the year in 2000. I remember that even among the metal kids, the Korn and Slipknot fans, Limp Bizkit was not seen as cool or good. This was in 2004, just after their 4th album came out, the one with Behind Blue Eyes on it. Redcap, however, only owned their 2nd album, Significant Other, and later, Chocolate Starfish and the Hot Dog Flavored Water, which becomes important later. If you were not a tween in 2004, here is the short version. This kid was obsessed with a so-called rebel band and tried to use them to seem frightening and cool 3 years after they had stopped being musically relevant. Most of us believed that was the end of it and that they would never come back. Fred Redcap fans proved us wrong in 2024 and 2025 with a Limp Bizkit revival. Whether our Redcap gets a revival of his own is something you will find out. For now, just picture this little kid strutting through the corridors of our secondary school, snarling at people, wearing a red baseball cap that no teacher could get him to take off, no matter what they tried. He took pride in singing along to Limp Bizkit's 2nd album, Significant Other, which he played on a battery-powered portable CD player with awful, tiny coax speakers plugged into the headphone port. No matter how many times the teachers tried to confiscate Redcap's CD player or ban him from listening to Limp Bizkit, he somehow managed to steal it back within a day and would return to blasting Significant Other through the corridors, hallways, and classrooms of our secondary school. I think the teachers might have taken him more seriously if the rest of us hadn't constantly mocked and made fun of him. Eventually, Redcap stopped caring that we weren't afraid of him. He went from trying to act tough to trying to be the class clown. Any attention was good attention to him, and we would constantly goad and bait him into making himself look stupid. For his part, he was getting the easy, free attention he wanted. I know for a fact that Redcap wasn't mentally ill or anything like that. He didn't come from a troubled home, and he was just a little strange back then. I don't know if this is still the case in British secondary schools, but when I was in school, music class was compulsory for the first couple of years. We didn't really learn much. It was an unstructured class. Sometimes we played around on instruments, other times we had to sing, and sometimes we were taught vague bits of musical history or half-hearted attempts at explaining musical notation. Music class was basically a free muckabout session, and we all loved it, not least because of our teacher, Mrs. Beaton. She was a sweet old granny type, clearly still teaching music because she genuinely enjoyed it. I went to a fairly rural school, and I think if she had taught in a bigger city, Mrs. Beaton would have been forced into retirement years earlier. But my school was small, underfunded, and didn't have a line of music teachers waiting to take her place. Mrs. Beaton never lost her temper, ever. She was probably the only teacher who genuinely tried with Redcap. I think it was because his strange Limp Bizkit obsession was music-related, and she believed she might reach him by being kind and encouraging him to listen to other music. It never worked. Redcap would just turn up Significant Other, usually Nookie or Break Stuff. Thanks to him, I heard those two songs more than any other music throughout 2004. To put it in perspective, that album came out in 1999. Limp Bizkit had released 4 albums by 2004. Redcap only owned that one, at least for most of the story. Mrs. Beaton tried hard to be kind to him, and he was rude as hell to her. Yet she never once got angry, raised her voice, or showed any frustration at all. Oh, there is one thing I have not mentioned about Redcap's copy of Significant Other yet. It was the censored version, so all the swear words were awkwardly muted, and his parents would not let him own the uncensored one back then because they thought it would be a bad influence. I first met them at Parents' Evening that year. They were sitting at the table next to mine, and I heard them describe their son as spirited and enthusiastic to a teacher who was explaining that, no, he was incredibly disruptive and badly behaved. They seemed genuinely shocked by this, which was the first time I realized his whole Redcap act mostly existed only at school. This was before the Mrs. Beaton incident. So, back to that. Every time he disrespected Mrs. Beaton, the rest of the class would get particularly angry at Redcap. We started calling him Redcap the Worst, which is probably a nickname Fred himself had heard plenty of times. But despite our attempts to use it as an insult, Redcap loved being called Redcap the Worst. Because we were stupid kids, we did not realize we were only encouraging him and rewarding his need for attention. A typical music lesson usually went something like this. Mrs. Beaton would say, "Hello, class," followed by some gentle teacher talk about Dance Macabre, Oasis, and other blurbs. And then she would sigh and add something about Limp Bizkit. She tried her best to work Limp Bizkit into her music theory lessons, knowing Redcap would bring them up anyway. Then Redcap would hear Limp Bizkit and take it as a signal to yell, "I did it all for the Nookie! Come on, the Nookie!" Or shout something like, "I'ma grab a chainsaw!" We would all yell at him to shut up and chant, "Redcap the Worst!" He would fire back at us in a poor imitation of Fred Redcap. Eventually, we were all disrupting the lesson, not just him. Mrs. Beaton would clap her hands together politely and ask for gentle, calm, quiet. That was her catchphrase. None of us wanted to upset Mrs. Beaton, our beloved teacher, so we would all settle down. After that, Redcap usually saved the swearing for the corridors, since it was the one thing teachers could not ignore. In other classes, his disruptive behavior stayed closer to the lines I quoted, or he would censor himself to avoid serious trouble. That was not the case in Mrs. Beaton's class, though. He knew lovely old Mrs. Beaton would never actually punish him, so he used that freedom to say the full range of F-bombs and B-words you would hear in their music. You could see that it genuinely bothered Mrs. Beaton every time he did it. Whenever he said the F word, she would twitch slightly and tell him it was harmful to use language like that. As an example of how deeply kind Mrs. Beaton was, Redcap even listened on occasion, and he would usually stop swearing once he saw he had offended her too much. The main event happened on the day we came back from half-term break. It was the final half-term of Year 7, which meant Redcap had been at the school for around 6 months. He had joined after the Christmas holidays, which was why he was the insecure new kid acting like a weirdo. It felt like he had been the main character of our entire school forever, even though that was probably just because he was in my class. Looking back, it was obvious the situation could not go on forever, and that something would eventually have to be done about Redcap to stop him disrupting our school lives. I sometimes wonder what things would have been like if the Mrs. Beaton incident had not happened. Maybe Redcap would have moved on to Linkin Park or called himself Shinoda and become a very different person. That day back after the summer half-term, he was still Redcap, but there was something different about him. We all noticed it right away because he had been spinning Significant Other every single day for 6 months. I noticed it most because my older sister owned other Limp Bizkit albums. I had heard it before when it came out in 2001, or whenever it was. The thing I am talking about was Limp Bizkit's third album, Chocolate Starfish and the Hot Dog-Flavored Water. Redcap had the CD. He was listening to it, jamming to Rollin' Air Raid Vehicle. There was a smug, excited look on his face, as if it were a brand new album. It was his first time hearing it. That turned out to be true. He had literally been gifted it for the first time on the way to school that day. Among his usual snarls and spinning his red cap on his finger, Redcap would point at his CD player during form room and say things like that it was a new album and it was good to anyone who came close. Of course, we encouraged him, asking about it and asking which tracks were his favorites. It was clear he loved Rollin' and Take a Look Around, which, to be fair, was a banger, because those were the 2 songs he kept playing over and over and singing along to, especially the latter. When he was listening to Rollin' for the 5th time, I noticed something. Not only did Redcap have a second Limp Bizkit album now, it was also the uncensored version. Fred let loose with a full barrage of cuss words on that record. Anyone who knows the Chocolate Starfish album can probably see why that mattered and where it was headed. If you don't, stay tuned, because music was our last lesson of the day. For most of the day, we saw Redcap strutting through the corridors or drifting in and out of our classes, rapping along to Roland, snarling at the Year 11s, and doing some kind of half-naked dance that I don't think Fred Redcap ever actually did. He spent the entire time sneaking around and hissing at the other children from behind the shiny black plastic. They loved it, and once again, he was a pleasure to watch. At the end of the day, he insisted on going home still wearing the cape and fangs. That weekend, I told my boyfriend about it and agreed that Arrive sounded like a genuinely nice kid. So, when Monday morning came, I was eager to see whether his little vampire act had lasted through the weekend. But Arrive was not in class that morning. We had the headmaster call his family at home to find out where he was, and only then did we learn that he was sick. The headmaster asked his parents to make sure they informed us of any illness in the future, and they said, "Sure, fine, no problem." And that was that. The next morning, Arrive still had not returned to school, so the headmaster called his family again to ask for an update. Their English was not very strong, but they could communicate well enough to say that Arrive still needed bed rest and would return to school as soon as he was able. Again, this was no problem. But after he failed to show up all week and then missed the first 2 days of the following week, we began to worry. The headmaster placed a third call to Arrive's family, and after receiving the same response that he was sick and needed bed rest, he asked if they had taken Arrive to a doctor. his parents said no. They had not taken him to a doctor, but the reasons for not doing so were lost in translation. That was the first time the words social services entered the conversation, and things escalated from there. A full 2 weeks after Hervé had been absent from school, a social worker knocked on the door of his family's home. The same conversation played out again, with the social worker being told that Hervé was sick. When she asked if she could come inside to see him, Hervé's parents refused. The social worker said she had the authority to return with a police officer, and that they could be arrested if they continued to deny her access to Hervé. But either they did not understand what she was saying, or they did not care. In an ideal world, the police would have gone to the house immediately to perform a wellness check. But red tape meant the social worker could not secure a specially trained member of the community outreach team until a full 3 weeks after Hervé's initial absence. Only then were they able to access Hervé's family home, and what they found inside must have shaken them to their very foundations. Hervé was lying in his bed, nothing more than skin and bones. There was evidence his family were trying to take care of him, but he was still dangerously ill. So after an ambulance was called, Hervé was rushed to the hospital. Upon his arrival, there was a frantic effort to find out what was wrong with him, because he truly was on death's door, so painfully thin. But the doctors soon figured out why he was so sick. Hervé hadn't eaten in nearly 3 full weeks, and had only been given the bare minimum of water to keep him alive. Once they realized it was a case of starvation, Hervé was slowly nursed back to health, and the police moved to arrest his parents. But from what I heard, Hervé's parents behaved unlike any the police officers had dealt with before, at least when it came to child neglect cases. They seemed like good, hard-working, honest-to-God people. They were absolutely devastated that their son was so ill. But when the police asked why Hervé was so malnourished, his parents couldn't understand what the problem was. In their view, they'd done exactly what a local holy man had advised them to do, which was to feed Hervé as little as possible in order to starve the demonic spirit they believed had possessed his body. I can only imagine how stunned everyone was when they heard Hervé's parents say that. But say it they did. They were completely steadfast in their belief that their son was possessed by a demonic entity. And the first clue they said they had gotten was his sudden and intense interest in the macabre. They went to that local holy man I mentioned, and he gave them his assessment, after which they did what they thought was best for their son. But in reality, it almost killed him. During the 3rd week, when Hervé was really starting to waste away, his parents arranged for the holy man to come over so he could give an exorcism. I don't think it was the kind you see in films, with holy water being thrown everywhere and people shouting in unison. But they did something, some kind of ritual meant to drive demonic forces from Hervé's small body. From their perspective, it didn't work, so the starvation diet simply continued. Hearing all of that was easily the most frightening and shocking thing I'd heard in my career, and nothing has topped it since. The thought of that poor little boy lying in that bed, wasting away while believing there was a demon inside him. It breaks my heart just as much as it sends a shiver down my spine. Hervé's parents ended up going to prison. Not for long, but I know they received custodial sentences, while Hervé went to live with a foster family in another part of the country. I had been looking forward to seeing him that Monday morning to see if he was still obsessed with Dracula. I had no idea that I was never going to see little Hervé again.